Welcome to the Ayn Rand Fan Club. I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig. William, how are you today?
I'm doing well, and I'm happy to report that we have another good episode for people today. With all the war going on in the Middle East, with Israel versus Hamas and Iran, we thought it'd be a good time to cover Ayn Rand's statements about innocence in war and the philosophy of war, the causes of war. So that's going to be the topic for today. And we're going to cover questions such as like which side to support in a war and who started the fight. Is that important? When is it proper to kill innocent people in order to, achieve victory in war? And how do emergency situations like war affect the standard of morality? Now, Ayn Rand wrote about war in an article called The Roots of War. This can be found in the Capitalism Unknown Ideal book or in her magazine, The Objectivist, from June 1966. Now, in that article, she discusses the causes of war, but she doesn't really get into like how to conduct a war or the tactics of war strategies. But I do want to, so we're not going to cover that article in this episode, but I did want to give a couple quotes to give the flavor, of her article and, indicate her theme of that article.
Where she's coming
One
from.
quote, yeah. So just basically, she was taking a very abstract philosophical position on the causes of war. And one quote I have here is, statism is a system of institutionalized violence and perpetual civil war. So that's an interesting quote because she's arguing that statism is what causes war because it begins with the initiation of force against its citizens. And so then that leads to more force and then force against nations. And another quote that is in the article is, the ideological root of statism is the tribal premise of primordial savages who, unable to conceive of individual rights, believed that the tribe is a supreme omnipotent ruler. So basically the tribe takes the place of a god. And so you think anything is okay in the name of your tribe. So she associated the ideological root with the tribal premise. And that's kind of just what I wanted to say regarding that article, to just give the flavor of that article. So I encourage people to read that article if they're not familiar with her position on the causes of war. Did you have anything?
Say at the outset, we're going to be a little bit critical of some of the comments she and other objectivists have made over the years. So consider that your trigger warning.
Yeah, and just as a preamble, again, she didn't really write an article on how to conduct a war. So what we have are quotes from her giving answers to questions after her lectures. So they're kind of impromptu, off the cuff answers. And I don't consider her answers to be part of her formal philosophy, but I do consider them to be her thinking at the time, which was in, the 60s and 70s.
Very good distinction. On this first clip is Rand on Vietnam, and she says there's no proper solution for Vietnam.
No, there is no proper solution for the war in Vietnam. It is a war we should never have entered. To continue it is senseless. To withdraw from it would be one more act of appeasement on our long, shameful record. The ultimate result of appeasement is a world war, as demonstrated by World War II. In today's context, it may mean a nuclear world war. That we let ourselves be trapped into a situation of that kind is the consequence of 50 years of a suicidal foreign policy.
Okay, so in that clip, which is actually from her speech, The Wreckage of the Consensus, she talks about Vietnam and, that we shouldn't have gone into that war, but now that we're in it, we should win it because, to leave would be an act of appeasement towards communism. I think there's a question there, a tough question to ask. And why does being involved in the war change whether we should be there in the first place? If it was wrong to join the fight, shouldn't we get out of it as soon as possible? I don't think it would be an act of appeasement. It might look that way, but in reality, I think it would be correcting a mistake. I think it would be fixing something that we shouldn't have done. And it doesn't matter what the appearance is to other people. You shouldn't really care, what other people think about it, especially your enemy. So you should care what reality is, what the truth is, and getting out of that war, I think, would just be fixing a mistake. And maybe we should have done something else instead of fighting them in Vietnam, and we could have pursued some other tactic or strategy. I'm not a military strategist, so I don't know exactly what should have been done, but just taking her statement at face value, I think there's an underlying problem with that philosophy.
It's funny you say that because I think at least a little of this is that she and many other pacifists during World War II got burned a little bit. I mean, I read she suggested at one point that, we almost pushed Japan into attacking us by cutting off their fuel supplies. And I think that was maybe a common attitude in World War II among some of the Austrian economists. But ultimately, by the time of Vietnam, I mean, she was about at least winning, and that may have played a role. I think it's interesting, to blame our foreign policy. I mean, these days, everyone blames our foreign policy, even the left.
Well, would you identify her as a pacifist? Because I think she was just more of a, American.
I'm saying in World War II she was. I wouldn't say that by Vietnam she was a pacifist. Her attitude was, well, we shouldn't have gotten in, but we're in, so now let's, go full force and win it.
Well, to me, pacifist means something else. It means you're just against war on principle. But if you have to go to war, then you are for the war. So I think she's for wars that we have to go into. But she's against wars that are not in our self-interest. And I just think she considered Vietnam not in our self-interest.
Yeah, I think that was going on. But at the end of the day, I mean, she's saying that now that we're here, we have to fight it.
Yeah, that's the question, right? Is why do we need to fight it? I mean,
well, it's
just because of the way it'll look.
I think she goes on to say that, if we had a better foreign policy, that we could then state what we're doing and, it wouldn't be appeasement, and then we could get out. But we had to have whether it's cultural self-confidence or what, or just, an explicit egoistic foreign policy. But in this next video, this is some questions that Rand got. And it's interesting, ARI put this video together, the Ayn Rand Institute, right after, it was in October of 2023, so right after Israel was attacked. And I'm a big supporter of Israel, but I think that, they were definitely picking clips that show Rand, talking about how you don't even have to be concerned with innocence. And in fact, she's asked to defend one country attacking another. And she brings up how the people of a country are responsible for their government's wars.
Even Soviet Russia, who did not elect the communists, keeps them in power by passivity. Nazi Germany did elect its dictatorship, and therefore even those Germans who were against Hitler were still responsible for that kind of government and had to suffer the consequences. Therefore, if we attack a dictatorship or any enslaved country, I want to say that individual citizens in a country that goes to war are responsible for that war, which is why they should be interested in politics and careful about not having the wrong kind of government.
Oh yeah, this is a very important point that she's making, because she's trying to defend killing innocents by saying the people, the citizens are responsible for the government that goes to war. And so if you kill innocents, then you're killing people who are responsible for that war. Now this, I think abstractly, on a very broad abstract level, I think this kind of works as a justification, but then when you get down to the details, it doesn't really work, because you have to notice or acknowledge that there are babies and dissidents or rebels, the opposition to the government, who are technically going to be innocent. I don't think you need to do this broad sweep against the citizens of a country in order to justify killing innocents. I think there's another way of going about it. It's just that when you're defending yourself by attacking another country, there's going to be collateral damage if these people are in the way of you pursuing victory. Now, obviously, you don't want to kill innocents if you can avoid it. But collateral damage or incidental damage, there's a lot of terms for this. I like unavoidable casualties. That's killing innocents when you can't avoid it. Like bombing occupied France to get the Germans out, and you kill a few French people.
But there's a difference between that and then collectively punishing people and saying you're all responsible for your government if you get bombed. If just because you get killed by a bomb in occupied France during World War II and you were part of the resistance, I mean, it doesn't mean that you're responsible now because she doesn't want to feel bad about the inadvertent killing of innocents. So it's one thing to say it's a horrible tragedy, war is hell, but then to say they're morally culpable that's a bridge too far for me.
It is a stretch, and the only way I can think to use that argument is to say that they're paying into the economy. They're part of the system of that government through their whatever taxes they pay or trade they engage in with the government. So at some minor level, they're some necessary level for them to just live and exist in that country, they're contributing to the existence of that system. But that's
a different level for each individual.
That doesn't mean
some
they're
of them may be like rah-rah supporters of the Nazis or something, not just stuck there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to say they're contributing to the economy of that system, and it's another to say they're responsible for casualties that you killed. There's a long chain of reason between those two things. And I think it ultimately breaks down at the idea of responsibility. Because, when we think of responsibility, we think of you acting in a way that causes something that you're responsible for. And so it kind of breaks down when you have this separation between the innocent civilians who are just going about their daily lives and then a government who's ruthless and dictatorial and attacking other nations. Especially if these people are in the resistance and trying to fight against it in some manner, even if they're just blowing up railroad tracks or something like that. They're doing something about it. Maybe they tried to escape and they couldn't escape. It's hard to escape these countries.
I just don't like the broad brush of everyone seemingly having the same moral culpability when that's just not how it works on the ground.
And this may be a problem with answering questions off the cuff. She didn't have time to really flesh this out or think about it in depth. And so she didn't have time to go into, all the factors involved. Here we are, we've spent a lot of time preparing this podcast. And so we've thought about it a lot, and we've had the benefit of history and learning through Vietnam and all the other wars. So maybe she just didn't have enough information and not enough time to work this out.
I think you made an important point earlier about this not being the philosophy. In many cases, these are just her extemporaneous political opinions. And even though politics itself is a branch of philosophy, the current political context, it doesn't apply necessarily to to some of her comments. In fact, this next one, she was asked, what do you think about the killing of innocent people in war?
Certainly the majority in any country at war is innocent. But if by neglect, ignorance, or helplessness, they couldn't overturn or choose a bad government and choose a better one, then they have to pay the price for the sins of their government, as all of us are paying for the sins of ours. That's why we have to be interested in the philosophy of government and in seeing, to the extent we can, seeing to it that we can have a good government, because a government is not an independent entity. It's supposed to represent the people of a nation. If some people put up with Soviet dictatorship, not all of them, you know, but some do, as they did in Germany, they deserve whatever their government deserves. There is no innocent people in war. The only thing to be concerned with is who started that war. And once you can establish that it's a given country, there is no such thing as considerations for the right of that country, because it has initiated the use of force and therefore stepped outside the principle of right.
Yeah, so that is a very interesting remark she made about there being no innocence in war. Because it seems
that's what she said in the second half of the answer. She talked about innocence in the first part.
Yeah, so she seems to be contradicting herself in this one clip. First of all, she says, quote, certainly the majority in any country at war is innocent. But then later she says there are no innocents in war. So I think that's just her, not having enough time to work this out. And so she's kind of using the term innocent in two different ways, I think. Like on one hand, she's talking about the general application of innocence. She's thinking most people aren't engaged in the war, so they're innocent people. But then on the other hand, she's going back to her idea that, people vote for their government or they support their government, and so they're responsible for war, and therefore there's no innocence. So she's using it in two different ways in the same statement here. So it's very confusing.
Yeah, and that's not even the only thing I found, because she really focuses on who's starting the war. But she was talking to Playboy magazine, and they said, in any free nation today has the moral right, though not the duty, to invade Soviet Russia, Cuba, or any other slave pen, as she called it. And they were quoting her, and she says, correct. A dictatorship, a country that violates the rights of its own citizens, is an outlaw and can claim no rights. So in her answer, she's talking about it being important about who started the war. But in terms of, she's saying that basically freer countries have the right to start a war with less free states at a certain point, certainly a dictatorship.
Right. Yeah. So there seems to be a conflation or confusion at two different levels here, at the level of killing innocents and then at the level of who started the war, and like whether it's right to invade another country.
Right, or what the standard is. I mean, I guess you could argue that, the dictatorship initiated the force by existing, and so the free country's just defending itself. But it's not, what does starting it mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have national boundaries, then starting it means one country physically attacks another country, sends a rocket across the border or sends soldiers across the border. That's a war, or just declares war against the other country.
I mean, in the 6-Day War, Israel could see them massing at the borders, and they basically did a preemptive strike.
Well, I believe in preemptive strikes as well. Like if you're threatening to invade another country, that other country doesn't have to wait for you to invade. If you're just sending soldiers to the border, that's a threat. That's an objective threat to your nation, to your national boundary. And so that could be considered the initiation of force. Just like threatening to kill someone is an initiation of force. And so you have a right to defend yourself from a threat, if it's a real threat.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just saying that the U.S. or any free nation has the moral right to invade Soviet Russia. That
That's
was
something different. That's something different. Yeah, I think because they're not. So Russia's not amassing soldiers along the Mexican border or something. That if we just go and like attack Soviet Russia, that would be the start of the war, right? I think because
but
they're
morally
unless they,
right to her.
yeah, I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis was something like they put missiles in Cuba so that we could consider that a threat. And so that was why everyone was afraid. That was a terrible time and it had to be resolved. But if Russia's just over there in the Eastern world and not doing anything to threaten us, and we just go over there and attack them with bombs, that would be us starting the war, I think. Now, whether we have the right to go over there and try to free the dissidents or the resistance in Russia and free them from that awful dictatorship they live under, that's another question. Like, is that a justification for our war?
Right. It's just is it about who starts it or is it about who's just the freer country?
Right. I mean, she often uses the distinction between the civilized world and primitives or the primordial savages, she calls them in one quote. So if we're just going to side with the civilized countries, does it really matter who starts a war? If let's say we're the only civilized country in the world, and we just go around, we want more friends, and so we go and we take out the primitives and we civilize them. Is that okay? Is that morally justified?
Well, how does it work with mixed economies? Is it at what measures do we no longer have the right to invade?
Yeah, I mean that's a really confusing when you have a mixed economy because then where's the balance? If we're 51% statist, does some other country that's freer have the right to invade us? I think at some level you have to recognize nations and you have to recognize that even a dictatorship that has national borders and is not a real threat to other nations around it has some sovereignty, even though it's a dictatorship or like a monarchy or something. You have to recognize some sovereignty. You can't expect every nation in the world to be like yours because people go through a development through history and they learn things, and maybe they're not at the educational level to have individual rights.
Yeah. Well, in this next clip, she's asked about why politics matters when it comes to war.
Why is it important to be concerned about politics? Why should we care about having the right social system? Because our lives are dependent on it. Because those systems, good or bad, are established in our name and we bear the responsibility. So that the Soviet citizens who are innocent, I hope, someday will be destroyed in a proper war along with the guilty. There aren't very many innocent ones, and they're not in the big cities. They're mainly in concentration camps. But right or wrong, nobody must put up with aggression and surrender his right of self-defense for fear of hurting somebody else, guilty or innocent. When someone comes at you with a gun, if you have 1 ounce of self-esteem, you will answer him by force, never mind who he is or who is behind him. If he is attacking you because he's out to destroy you, and this is what you owe to the sanctity of your own life, if you have self-esteem.
Yeah, so this might be the quote I have the biggest problem with. I think she makes an error in her formulations here. And I can understand, that she's making these errors because she's speaking off the cuff. I hope that if she had more time to think about it, she would have checked it and come up with something else. But for example, she says she hopes innocent Russians are destroyed. Now, why would you say that? I mean, I think that's unnecessary. First of all, it's unnecessary to say something like that. And second of all, I think it's morally objectionable to just want innocents to die, to be destroyed. The proper formulation should be that if they have to be destroyed, so that you can survive and, protect your country, then so be it. That has to happen, but it's a tragedy.
Right.
We don't want that to happen.
And we can acknowledge it's a tragedy without then becoming like morally ready to surrender to our enemies.
Right. And I think this is an example of her exaggerating. She tends to like to exaggerate a lot and just kind of focus on the abstract, broad propositions. And that's kind of a mistake here. I think this is a very difficult subject to understand and should be treated more seriously and in more detail. Another example in that quote is she says, if you have any self-esteem, then you defend yourself. Never mind who he is, never mind who's behind him. So that again,
that matters.
That's a bad formulation. What if it's your daughter or your son who's having a psychological episode, and you would rather die than kill your son or daughter, or your son or daughter's behind the person you got to shoot, and you don't want to risk, and you're a bad shot, and you don't want to risk hitting your family. Or you can think of other situations where this broad generalization wouldn't be applicable, or it wouldn't work.
I mean, speaking of broad generalizations, the nobody must put up with aggression, I think, could too easily become like a BLM slogan or lefty slogan, with people saying that capitalism is aggression.
Yeah, I mean, it would matter what your definition is. And we tend to argue over definitions all the time. And when you're dealing with someone like the BLM or the woke left, you're just not going to agree on these definitions because they have a wildly different worldview, and they believe in a different way to use language than we have. So it's you can't even talk to these people half the time.
I mean, saying nobody must put up with aggression is a great ideal, but we end up putting up with various levels of aggression, even for, just maneuvering through everyday life.
And that's part of, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So and that reminds me of, a part of what I would consider to be forming a proper standard for war, for actions, for acting during wartime. If you agreed with Ayn Rand, you'd say that anything you do in self-defense is proper. But I think that forgets or puts aside the fact that we are rational animals, and we can't just put aside the standard of reason. Reason is our only absolute, according to Rand. And so even during wartime, even during emergency situations, we need to apply as much reason as possible. Obviously in a lot of emergency situations, there's a time crunch or a time factor, and you just have to act. But still, you're acting on reflex or quickly thinking of whatever you can do. And so the first thing that pops into your head is what you do. That's based on how you've thought through things your whole life and what your standing orders are and how you respond to things. It's not necessarily based on emotion. It could be that you have a few seconds to think of something rational to do, and you do it. And so I think that we have to maintain that standard of reason to some degree, but allow for the time crunch and allow for the fact that people have to act immediately sometimes. And it's not always going to be based on the most proper thing they could have done. It could be just based on the first idea they came up with, and it was either right or wrong.
that's where I agree a little bit. I mean, there's a little bit within war for just having to act in the moment, not being able to consider everything as carefully as you could in peacetime. But but then, and that goes back to the, it's collateral damage, and you didn't mean to target civilians, and that is a distinction that matters. In this next clip, Rand talks about when civilians can be hit in war.
So that such a thing as don't bombard hospitals. Well, it's valid if both sides see an advantage in it. But the idea don't murder women and children, I don't think is particularly relevant if you're murdering men. What's the difference? And it's demonstrated in Vietnam all the time because women and children are right there with the guerrillas. How are you going to make a distinction? If it is tactically necessary to bomb civilians during a war, you have to. More than that, it's your moral duty to do so. Because otherwise, what are you doing? Kind of a medieval, tournament where people are dying while waving ladies' handkerchiefs. There is no laws can hold, nothing can hold, no morality can hold against state of war. And if it's in a war, one party is the aggressor, anything that the other party does is morally justified.
Again, there, I think she makes some flubs with the formulations. But instead of focusing on the negative, I'd like to focus on one positive that I agree with in this. She does qualify killing innocents in one sentence there by saying, if it's tactically necessary. I think that's an instance where she came up with the right idea, the right formulation. And so that's a good indication that she does see, a proper standard for the killing of innocents in war. But she doesn't always think of it or include it, incorporate it into her formulations.
Yeah, I mean, she invokes moral duty, basically to support bombing indiscriminately in some cases. But I think what you're saying about the tactics matters. And this goes back a little bit to, open versus closed objectivism, because technology has changed over time and there's less need to do indiscriminate bombing now with things where you can see through walls, or you have smart bombs, and so you at least take that stuff into account. Now you could say some of that stuff was built to avoid civilian casualties, and she's making a good distinction in Vietnam where they're using women and children on the battlefield as support. And so, that was part of the propaganda war, to show these dead women and children when in fact they were in the theater of combat. And that is a fair distinction to make.
Yeah, I think so. She was talking about all this, before modern hybrid warfare, or whatever they call it now, where they strap bombs to women and children. So she was still dealing with mostly a conventional type of warfare. But in Vietnam, the women were fighting, and some of the children. So I think she had a bias against that, that era of fighting. Maybe if she saw what was happening today, and she saw all of our high-tech weaponry and our ability to, or at least Israel's ability to take out the generals and avoid as many civilian casualties as possible, she'd have a different take on it. Obviously, we have all this new information and history to help us come up with ideas here, but she didn't.
I just, the whole "I'm in the right, so anything goes." I mean, that may have applied to how she kicked Brandon out of the movement, and I mean, there is a little bit of a tie. The way that they are in war is also the way that they've been in their schisms.
It's a very either or strategy. You're either with us or against us, and if you get on my bad side, you're out. So that It is. They are very confident. You got to respect their confidence in their mind and their ideas. But I don't think there was anyone around to convince Ayn Rand otherwise. She couldn't be convinced because she had the ideas, and it was hard to talk her down from any like potential mistakes she was making.
Yeah, she just cut you out.
But I did want to make one more point. I think it's important, since we're criticizing Rand, it's important to offer positive, reformulation or an answer. So again, I want to say it's important to maintain the rational standard. What is rational here? And don't just dismiss everything because you're acting in self-defense and whatever you do is proper. I think it matters what you do. You are responsible for your own actions, even if they're in self-defense, and you're attacking an aggressor, and in order to take that person down or take that nation down, innocents are in your way and they're going to die. It's important to realize that even though you might not be held legally responsible for those deaths, you're still morally responsible for your own actions. And so you could consider them like justified homicides. You're responsible for their death, but it was justified in some way. And I just want to put that out there because I think that's what was missing there in what Rand was saying is, you don't have to go to this extreme position that, these innocent people are not innocent. You don't have to say that. You can just say
force is not always your best move. I mean, you can accuse your daughter of being Hitler, but you might face some blowback in the public for it.
Right. Yeah. Really think things through before you make these grand statements,
Now, a lot of people probably remember when Ayn Rand was on Phil Donahue and her comments on Israel versus the Arabs.
If you mean whose side should one be on, Israel or the Arabs, I would certainly say Israel because it's the advanced, technological, civilized country amidst a group of almost totally primitive savages who have not changed for years and who are racist and who resent Israel because it's bringing industry and intelligence and modern technology into their stagnation.
So I believe that was later on in her life. Was that in the 79 or 80? When was that?
One of the two, yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty late in her intellectual development regarding this issue. And so she's kind of concluded that it doesn't really matter who started the war. She doesn't seem interested in that. She seems more interested in supporting the civilized over the primitive. And that's what she's focusing on here. And to some degree, I kind of agree. I think we do need to form some standard. Like there's got to be a limit to this, right? You can't just favor every civilized country if they just go and like wipe out poor, helpless African nations or something.
Exactly. China's bringing technology to Africa. Does that give them the right to subjugate them?
Yeah, again, it goes back to how you see nations and their sovereignty and respect for, it could be that they confine their so-called, violence or initiation of violence to their own people, but they're tribalists. And so that's just their way of life. They don't see it as violence. They see it as their way of life. Now,
starts to back into Rand on Native Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some Native Americans who were peaceful, and so we tried to help those tribes. But again, every tribe is going to be a little different. Some are cannibals, and so I would be in favor of wiping them out. Right? If you encounter a cannibalistic tribe, just go and wipe them out. That's terrible. But if they're peaceful and they've achieved some agriculture, maybe, or tool working, and you got to respect them at some level. And if they're not attacking you and they're smart enough to deal with you, trade with you or deal with you on a peaceful level, there's no real reason to just go in and wipe them out in a war. You don't have to do that. You could allow diplomats to go in and talk to them and try to gradually take them to a better, freer society, while respecting their own culture that they have that's generally peaceful.
And presumably, because of Israel's higher status on the civilization chart, it wouldn't even really matter if they started it. They didn't, but I'm just saying if they started like a new war or something like in 6-Day War.
Yeah, I mean, so again, a lot of people bring up the history of the Middle East and the history of Israel, and I'm not a scholar on that. I don't know all the details, so I don't really feel like I can go into an argument about who started the whole conflict going back to biblical days.
Well, there's this attitude that what was once Muslim land should always be Muslim land. It's Dar al-Islam. I mean, bin Laden was talking about Andalusia and Spain that they lost. And so that's the driving premise. They did not want Israel to have a state, and they just were against its existence from the beginning. And so it's like, for me, how do you negotiate with people who won't recognize your existence?
Yeah, and I think just the fact that Israel has built up such an incredible nation over there, and then you look around at Hamas and what they've done and the Palestinians, it's just night and day. And
that's some of what Rand was saying.
Yeah, and if you're going to support anyone and you don't really have a beef with how Israel came to be, like you're not really interested in the history too much, and all you see is civilization blossoming in the Middle East, then you got to support Israel to some extent. Maybe you criticize some of their tactics, but you got to be generally in favor of Israel, I think.
Well, now I want to shift gears a little bit here. Leonard Peikoff, right after 9/11, to be fair to him, was on with Bill O'Reilly. And he somewhat echoed Rand when it comes to the status of innocence.
I'm absolutely not concerned with innocence people in the enemy territory. If they get killed, that is the responsibility of their government for initiating aggression against us. In any war, when you fight the enemy, you have to take anyone in that territory and regard him as part of the enemy. Otherwise, you can't defend yourself. If you're concerned with the innocents in those countries, you are pulling your punches and thereby jeopardizing the innocence in our countries. It's either or. If you believe in self-defense, you fight it to the full.
So, yeah, I think that's a mistaken formulation. And again, he's speaking off the cuff. He's on a TV show. So maybe he doesn't want to get into many details or, break it down like he would in a speech or lecture or something. But I think that there's several reasons why you might want to be concerned with innocence. They're your friend. First of all, they might be your friends. They might be working with you. It would be good to keep them alive in that country so you can get information from them or intelligence. There's several moral and tactical or practical reasons why you might want to avoid a certain building because the resistance is there. So I think it's just a mistake for him to take that, hasty generalization where you shouldn't have any concern for innocence.
Yeah, I mean, and Yaron talks about needing to crush enemies and humiliate them, citing Japan and Germany. But to some extent, we were lenient with Japan and West Germany, if only because of the Cold War. And, even going further back, to some extent, Hitler rode to power by using the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. And there was also the honorable way they tried to treat the South during Reconstruction to heal the country after the Civil War and bring it back together. So, there are contexts in which going full force does not necessarily make sense, even if you're, not being an altruist.
Yeah, it depends on your goals and what the threats are to you. So if there's like a incredible threat to your army or something that's ongoing and you just absolutely need to wipe out a city or something because it's filled with guerrillas who are threatening your army, then okay, I mean you got to do what you got to do to protect your own soldiers. But in a lot of cases, that's not going to be a factor. Your goal is to win the war with minimal deaths to the innocents. And if there's very little threat to your army and you're like a superpower and you have all the air power, like you've wiped out all their anti-aircraft stations, and you can just fly over at will and bomb whatever you want, then there's not a whole lot of threat, going on. It's just you trying to get them to surrender. And you might want to do that in a way that limits the casualties of your friends and the resistance there.
Yeah. Well, in this next clip, Peikoff is explaining to O'Reilly why Bush should only have a strategic goal about winning, and then the military should decide things like whether or not to nuke a country like Iran. And that's too much for O'Reilly.
Excuse me, wars are conducted where the policy is set by the administration, the political and strategic goal. The weaponry, what it is, has to be properly decided by the generals in the field.
No, you're
if
crazy.
The White House.
You sound like Dr. Strangelove, Doctor.
No,
what are you, Dr. Strangelove out there?
If the White House takes it over and hampers them, you're just talking about Vietnam again.
No, yeah, I mean, we had remember General
reasons.
Doctor, another breath. You remember General Curtis LeMay? He wanted to use nuclear weapons in North Vietnam. Come on. Come on.
We should never
can't be
have been
doing
in
that
North
kind of
Vietnam.
stuff. What?
Don't tell me we shouldn't do it. We should never have been in North Vietnam, and we should not be focused.
You don't let the military dictate which weapons you use. They go by the Defense Department and the Pentagon. They're told what to do, and they do it. But one last question, Doctor.
Who
Doctor,
know
one
what
last
they're
question.
doing? Yes.
I'm not.
Which the people in Washington don't.
I'm not a person who is easily dissuaded from justice, but I don't want to see women and children in Afghanistan slaughtered by bombs. I don't want to see that.
You're going to see women and children in New York slaughtered by bombs, and that's your only choice.
Well, I do think Leonard has a point. I don't like O'Reilly's rhetoric in this clip. He calls him Dr. Strangelove. That's outrageous. But, I think that Leonard's point about we've already seen women and children being killed from the terrorists. They took down the Twin Towers. So obviously, O'Reilly has forgotten the immediate history there, or he doesn't know what he's talking about, because Leonard has the point. If you don't stop the threat somehow, I'm not saying, we should wipe out everyone, including innocents, but I'm saying you got to do something radical to stop the threat of them flying planes into our buildings.
Right. But I mean, look, all of us were concerned right after 9/11 that there were going to be more attacks. And I know I was one of them. But the bottom line is, for however our policy unfolded, and probably people at ARI weren't happy. They probably considered Bush's policy appeasement. But, we haven't really had that 9/11 style attack since then.
Yeah, well, we've done a lot to try to prevent it. We had the whole TSA going on, and we've been conducting military campaigns in the Middle East. Leonard's point was we need to wipe out Iran. And it seems like history has shown that that's what needs to happen, because we've finally gotten around to dealing with Iran. And Israel has been attacking their proxies. So it seems like that's what's finally happening, and that's probably what should have happened in the beginning.
Just as a practical point, what he was saying about how, Bush sets the strategy, or the president, and then the military has to decide what weapons to use. I mean, the implication is that, like, the military wasn't going to consult with him before they dropped a nuke on Iran or something. I mean, he's still having the president's still going to decide what weapons get used ultimately. That's part of the political calculation. It's why we have civilian rule of the military.
Yeah, that was a very confusing argument they were having. I think on one hand, Leonard is right. In the battlefield, the generals are in charge, and so they're going to decide whether to launch this rocket or that rocket. But when you're dealing with something like nuking a country, that's got to happen at a much higher level, and the president is involved. So on one hand, O'Reilly's got a point, and on the other, Leonard's got a point. I just think they're talking past each other, and they were getting emotional, because O'Reilly's starting to call him names, Dr. Strangelove, and coming up with ridiculous rhetoric, because that's what O'Reilly does, is he inflames the rhetoric.
It's something about that moment, I believe, was at least part of why Peikoff was so anti-Republican in 2004.
Could be. I mean, it is hard to talk to some Republicans like that, when they inflame it, especially on the abortion topic. I mean, oh my God, you can't talk to them about that.
Yeah. Well, along those same lines, we've got some clips from Yaron as well. And in this is from earlier this year in January of 2025, and he's talking about the Middle East situation and what's going on. He says that Palestinians need to be crushed. So later in the show, he's asked to clarify.
What does crushing Palestinians look like? It means no water, no food, no electricity, no internet access, which is all things that Israel has been providing them. No cell phone coverage, all things Israel has been providing them, until they free all the hostages and they hand over that Hamas basically disarms unilaterally and surrenders. And if people die of starvation, if people die in the streets, it's on them. Now, Israel would be painted as monsters. Yeah, doing the right thing is often going to present you as a monster. Give Palestinians an option. They can get food and water and stuff if they're willing to leave. If they're willing to get on a boat and leave, they can do that. But Israel is no longer supplying them with food, water, electricity, cell phone coverage, and internet access. That's one way. You could carpet bomb them. That's another way.
So I think this is really relevant now, because in the last couple of days, we've seen, the starving of Palestinians become a humanitarian crisis. People they're stopping the aid trucks from getting in and creating a humanitarian crisis to blame Israel. And some of the international communities going along with it. I mean, it's basically what he was saying to do, but it's actually happening by Hamas. To see, this is what the anti-Jewish people mischaracterize as being a widely held view among Israelis, but it's really just people like your own. Most Israelis don't want to actually, take that level of warfare where they're just killing and starving people. And, what your own people are willing to do and support is something worth considering.
It sounds like Yaron is advocating siege tactics. So, this is what they did to the city of Troy.
Yeah, there have been sieges. I mean, or, Stalingrad, I think there was a siege in World War II. But, as technology gets better and, what we can do, or, there's logistical problems getting the food to the Palestinians, and the terrorists are playing a role in that and keeping it for themselves to foster a crisis. So it's like, you hardly have to try to foster a crisis. And these, because I agree that there is altruism in the world today, and that they tend to support the weaker person, even if they're nastier. But in this case, it's just like, why is it your best move to actually just starve these people, and or to be seen as starving them in today's world, when we're like having musicians 40 years ago sending food to Africa when there was a famine. There's different standards today, and that's part of closed objectivism. He still has to just say whatever Rand was saying 60 years ago.
So are you saying that Israel is actually conducting a siege, or you're saying that Hamas is making it look that way by confiscating food trucks and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure whether it's a conscious decision on Hamas to create a food situation or whether that was their plan going in, but they're stopping the food trucks from getting to the Gazans, or in some cases, they're just like hoarding it for their own soldiers and favorites that are loyal.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I have an opinion on this, tactically, but, broadly speaking, I think Israel should be given, a lot of leeway in how they conduct this battle, because they are dealing with entrenched terrorists, and they need to repel this threat. That's the threat to their citizens that happened like on October 7th, and with all the bombs they launch into Israel or rockets. So I give them a big leeway. And
I do too. I think that he's making Israel look bad by saying to starve them when Israel doesn't even want to do that.
If that's true and Israel is not conducting a siege, then then Iran's just wrong. I find it odd too that Iran is going into these military tactics. Does he have the actual experience to know in this war to know what needs to be done? I mean, I know he was an intelligence officer in the Israeli army, so maybe he has some knowledge here, experience, but he's getting into some fine details about what to do. And he's basically saying he knows better than the Israeli generals. So it's hard to accept that.
Yeah, he's talking about how Israel should have taken Iran out themselves with no U.S. support. It's like they may not be able to do that on their own, and they've assessed that behind the scenes.
It could be that Israel wants to maintain as much goodwill as possible. So they rely on American military equipment. So they don't want to piss off America too much. In some instances, if you're a small nation like Israel and you require help from the Western world to conduct your battles and have self-defense capabilities, you can't just do anything you want to wipe out an enemy. You have to maintain support from your friends. And so if your friends are complaining and saying, look, we don't like what you're doing here, can you back off a little bit? Then you got to take that into consideration, because you're not a self-sufficient nation when it comes to this war. And I think that's something Iran should consider. It's a rational consideration, in my view. It's if you're not capable of manufacturing what's the system that knocks down the rockets? I forget what it's called.
Iron Dome?
Iron Dome. If you can't produce the Iron Dome yourself and you need America to help you, well, then you're reliant on America in some way. And so you got to do what America says.
Yeah, I mean, I respect their right to go off on their own sometimes. I don't think it's in their interest to do so. And I think they've gamed out that it's not in their interest to do so. But
that could also be that, there's other factors involved here. So there are.
He's not privy to what's the intel.
Yeah, they've probably got spies there, and they don't want to just starve everybody. So they got other things to worry about, than how much food is getting in there.
Well, if anything, they're trying to help the UN get it in there. And the UN may be helping to exacerbate this by not being willing to go in there with the terror threat. But I do want to go back to Yaron also did a video on the morality of war back in 2004. I thought there were a couple of clips worth playing from this. In one of the things that he said that was striking was that in war, the wife of a drafted soldier is a morally legitimate target as much so as the soldier.
In war, the wife of the drafted soldier is as morally legitimate a target as the soldier himself. What then about the truly innocent? The freedom fighters, the descendants, which are always a small minority in any country. Insofar as they can be isolated without military cost, they should not be killed. It is unjust, anti-selfish, to senselessly kill the innocent. And it is of value to have more rational, pro-American people in the world. But insofar as they cannot be isolated, they are threats. Since sparing their lives means sacrificing ours, and we should kill them without moral hesitation.
This is, some of it is bad rhetoric. It's unnecessary to say that the wife is a morally legitimate target, just like the soldier. Well, I mean, why do you even need to say that? It's not like you're gonna, if the wife's in one building and the soldier's in the other, you're gonna just send a bomb to each building. Why? Why do you have to kill the wife? It's like a waste of a bomb.
I think he's just saying don't just try to discriminate at the cost of your safety, if I'm being fair. But it's interesting because a little bit after that clip, he does say that he's against rape as a war option, that it can, really never be. And he goes into some of the things that, it can give you a bad reputation and see you as brutal. It's like, well, some of these apply to some of the other stuff you're talking about.
Well, what if rape is necessary?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, yeah, once you say all's fair in love and war, it's, that it seems like it's just because it's even more repugnant.
Yeah, it's just like, well, on one hand, it's hard to imagine a scenario where you need to rape somebody. You could just torture them. You don't have to rape them. Torture is probably more effective anyway. So, but were you going to rape some soldier's wife? I mean, that's not only is it repugnant morally, it's probably not going to work. He's gonna say whatever you want him to say. So you're not going to be able to trust the information you get from him. If he has information, there are other ways to get it. You can pull his fingernails out or something.
Yeah, but going back to, we talked about Rand with a seeming contradiction when she talked about, there are innocents in war and then there are no innocents in war. We had the same kind of thing. And this does, at first, Yaron repeats that being into politics is important, but later in the same video, he wants you to abandon politics.
If some future US president initiated force against another country, that country, acting in self-defense, would have every right to kill you and me, even if we objected to the president's actions. This is why understanding and being involved in what is going on in politics is a selfish obligation.
But later in the video, he had a different take.
If I ran for president, I'd get 300 people voting for me. I mean, I'd say all the right things. I'd advocate the right policy, but nobody would vote for me. So, of course, what you need to do first is, in my opinion, if you're a good person, is abandon politics.
So, which is it? Is politics important for our lives? Because, otherwise our politicians could get us into a war, and it's that crucial? Or maybe we should just abandon it if we're good people?
Yeah, and it's not exactly clear what he means by abandon politics, too. He's kind of conflating the issue here, or conflating the meanings. Like, he's talking about if he ran for president, but that's not going to happen. And is he saying, abandon politics? Does that mean to him that just means don't run for political office? Or does it mean give up the concept or the topic in general and just focus on philosophy or something else? But politics is part of philosophy. So should you abandon the philosophy of politics? I mean, what is he talking about here?
He's been, sometimes he says, don't talk about it. Then it's all he talks about on his show. So he's kind of been of two minds about it more broadly. That, he kind of wants none of his listeners to follow politics, so they get it all from him.
Well, you might be onto something there. Yeah, but it could just be that he means don't take politics seriously enough to where you want to get involved in political campaigns or something like that. Like focus on morality or your own life, or doing something else, spreading objectivism. Maybe that's what he really wants to say, but he's not articulate enough to actually convey that idea.
But being into politics is supposed to be selfish earlier in the video.
Yeah, I mean, we've had plenty of examples of him talking out of both sides of his mouth. So it should be nothing new to our audience. This is standard fare for Yaron. He says one thing and then he contradicts himself in the next sentence. So I don't know what to say other than don't take Yaron seriously. Abandon Yaron.
Well, speaking of, I do want to at least talk about some of the consequences of just, bluster off the cuff. And in this video from 2022, Yaron is talking about having a good presentation in Edinburgh while he's there, but he explains why he thinks more people weren't there.
Unfortunately, while initially we had expectation of over 100 people showing up, it turned out there was about half of that. And the reason I think was that people kind of Googled who I was, and they found all this stuff on Wikipedia about, torture, Palestinians, Israelis, war, and they decided to boycott me. So that's too bad. That's too bad for them. It's too bad for me. I would have enjoyed having double the audience. We're going to have to do something about me with my Wikipedia page. If there's somebody out there who wants to volunteer, basically what somebody needs to do to my Wikipedia page, and anybody can do it, right? Any one of you could do it. But somebody should go and onto my Wikipedia page and just edit it. So there should not be so much emphasis on foreign policy. My statements about bombing Iraq and about torture and stuff like that, you need a full context for that. You can't just throw them out there.
I just want to start and say it's a total violation of Wikipedia to be like calling for other people to edit your page.
Well, I don't know.
It's supposed to be organic.
But I don't know about that. But I think that not being proud of your past statements, that's a real problem. He's like, hey, I need you to get rid of this stuff. Yeah. Didn't he erase something else off the internet?
Yes, a question about mistakes he'd made in the past.
Yeah, so he has this habit of trying to erase his past. But he doesn't regret it. So he won't come out and say these were mistakes. I regret saying these things.
I don't want others to know about what I've said.
So he can't come out and say, I like what I said before and I'm proud of it. And okay, if people boycott me for my own beliefs, that's on them. It sucks for me not having an audience, but I stand by my remarks. I'm a man,
exactly. Own it.
People ban me or block me on Facebook for things I say. I don't care. That's their problem. They don't want to listen to me. That's fine. I'm going to move forward with my beliefs. But if I say something that is wrong, like I voted for frickin' Hillary Clinton the first time, that was a mistake. So if I make mistakes and I have it in my history, I'm going to fess up to it. I'm going to admit it and move on. If people want to bring it up, that's fine. I'll deal with it. But to say, edit my Wikipedia page, because I made these comments about torture and Palestinians. Well, you gave speeches about this. So
Right.
if people want the full context, they can go to your lectures and read what you've written.
And to your
Wikipedia is not about giving the full context. It's about giving positions or facts and then linking to the sources. So it's an encyclopedia.
And like you said, he doesn't regret them. It's like that comment he made about starving the Palestinians was in January of this year. This is in 3 years ago. He's complaining about people don't like it. So it's one or the other. Either, just make more responsible statements, less hyperbole, or own it and just be proud and let it all hang out there.
Yeah, it's just a sign that he's not a real man. He doesn't own his remarks from the past, and he's not capable of dealing with the consequences. He wants to manufacture a history that is more favorable to his current needs. He needs an audience. So he wants to erase whatever is preventing him from having a larger audience. Well, maybe you should have thought of that before. Maybe you should just be more authentic and say, look, yeah, there's this stuff in my history that I said, and I could have formed. He doesn't even have to apologize for it. He could just say, that was my thinking at the time. I've changed my mind. I've reformulated my ideas. I'm not for torture in this instance, but I do think it's still viable in this instance. He could change his mind, but he's not willing to do that. He's up against Antifa and people like this, and he just doesn't understand that they're not going to be placated by erasing something from Wikipedia. These are serious people who want to boycott you. They're going to find your crap. They're going to dig it up wherever it is.
You remember he and I fought about Netanyahu. And one of his main complaints about Netanyahu was that he was saying different things to an English audience than he was to a Hebrew audience. And to some extent, I feel like he's doing the same thing where he's, for his audience, he's like, yeah, war, nuke 'em, whatever. And but to his new audience that's coming in, we got to sanitize that Wikipedia page. I don't want him getting the wrong idea.
Well, that's one of his main problems, isn't it? His problem is that he began in the objectivist world, and he's trying to branch out and become this popular figure on YouTube. And so he's struggling with, having popular ideas versus having objectivist ideas. Because if he makes his ideas too popular, then he's going to upset his objectivist core, which he's already doing. They give him a
lot of leeway.
But he's already doing that. I mean, a lot of hardcore objectivists don't like him. But if he returns to a more standard objectivist, or even just a standard level of objectivity, he's going to piss off the popular people, and he's not going to appeal to whoever the heck, to his cult following, who worships everything he says. So,
well, if it makes you feel any better, I did check back 6 months, and there were a few edits made to his Wikipedia page. So apparently that speech worked on a few people.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it did. He's got a lot of cult followers over there.
Great. Well, we talked about a lot of really good stuff. Any final thoughts on any of the comments or speakers?
Yeah, I just want to make a point, stress the point about killing of innocents, because I think that's a critical issue in morality and war, and having to do with the use of force. So this is a critical issue that really needs to be clarified and evaluated properly. It's one thing that I think Rand was conflated about, and I think she had bad formulations. So the moral standard in dealing with innocence and and when they are killed in war or other circumstances, emergency situations, that needs to be articulated and applied. You need to apply a rational standard. You need to stick to reason and use that as a criteria for when it's okay or when it's justified to kill innocents, especially in war. I think this issue has a lot to do with free will. So you have to understand that because man has free will, he's responsible for his actions and his choices, even if he's killing innocents justifiably. So you can't say that man has free will and then deny him the responsibility of his actions. You just have to decide whether they're unjustified or justified.
And some of it is how much extra effort it is, versus your own call for carpet bombing, versus, doing something more meticulous, but to try to save lives, just in the name of humanity. So great stuff. Great we talked about. I think we'll be back in another week or so. So we'll look forward to it then. For now, I'm Scott Schiff along with William Swig, and we'll see you next time.